The sound was nothing more than the whisper of small paper folding, two sharp creases executed with quick, deliberate precision, followed immediately by the soft, unforgiving click of a heavy leather folder snapping shut. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had just taken a single, crisp sheet of paper, her own legislative record, printed in unyielding black and white, folded it sharply in half, folded it once more, and slid it deep into the dark confines of a binder where nobody would ever be able to see it. Across the heavy mahogany table, Senator John Kennedy sat perfectly still, his posture relaxed but his gaze unblinking, with that exact same page lying completely flat in front of him. His copy remained unfolded, unhidden, every single damning number facing the ceiling under the glaring lights of the hearing room. He did not need to hide it, simply because it was not his record to defend. To truly understand why a sitting United States Congresswoman felt the overwhelming compulsion to hide her own political resume on live national television, one must rewind the clock approximately 1 hour to the precise moment Kennedy handed that very paper to her and uttered 6 words she will likely never forget as long as she lives. "Congresswoman, I brought you something." He reached smoothly into his own neatly organized folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, just 1 page, and slid it across the polished surface of the table with the casual, devastating finality of someone sliding a receipt to a patron who had loudly demanded the check. "I printed your legislative record off GovTrack this morning," he said, his southern drawl measured and calm. "Everything is on there. Bills introduced, bills passed, days speaking on the floor, all of it." He settled back into the deep leather of his chair, letting the silence stretch before adding, "I wanted to print more, but it all fit on 1 page." The room caught the implication before she even had a chance to process it, emitting a low, collective sound that was not quite a laugh, but rather the visceral murmur a room makes when it knows exactly where a collision is heading, long before the person holding the steering wheel does. Now, Kennedy folded his hands resting on the desk. "Let's read it together. Top line. Bills you authored that became law. Read me that number, Congresswoman." Ocasio-Cortez looked down at the page, though she already knew what was printed there. She had known the brutal reality of that metric long before she ever took her seat in that chair. "Senator, legislative effectiveness cannot simply be reduced to a single metric," she began, her tone instantly defensive. "The vast work of a congressperson heavily includes coalition building, intricate amendment work, and robust public advocacy." "Ma'am," Kennedy interrupted, his voice never rising, as it never needed to. "1 number. Top line, right there on the very page I just gave you." The room waited in suffocating anticipation, the air growing thick. And then, finally, she said it. "In the 117th Congress, the number is 0. She said it fast, rushing through the syllable the way you try to sprint past a burning building you do not want to acknowledge. She was physically holding her own professional record in her own hand, and the very first number on the page was an absolute 0. If you want to witness the exact anatomical breakdown of what happens when a seasoned politician can no longer hide behind the impenetrable shield of her own carefully curated resume, you need to pay close attention to what happened next. Kennedy did not pounce. He did not raise his voice in victory. He simply repeated the number, flat, devoid of any emphasis, entirely stripped of sarcasm. 0. In 2 full years, while your own party completely controlled the House of Representatives, not one single bill with your name on it became the law of the land. He let that hollow number sit suspended in the air, allowing a fact to marinate the way you let the truth breathe when it requires absolutely no rhetorical assistance. "Next line down," he continued. "Days speaking on the House floor during that entire session, 11. He looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. "Now, I took the liberty of looking up your Instagram account this morning, Congresswoman. 8.4 million followers. That is significantly more than most sitting senators, far more than most governors, but 11 days on the actual legislative floor and 8 million followers on a digital screen." He placed those 2 contrasting numbers side by side on the table of public opinion and let the vast, echoing canyon of distance between them do all the heavy lifting. "Where I come from, we have a very specific word for a person who is exceptionally famous for talking endlessly about a job they do not actually do, but I am simply too polite to say it on national television." The laugh that erupted from Kennedy's side of the room came warm, easy, and completely unforced, the undeniable kind of laugh that signals a man has just made an airtight point and absolutely everybody in the building knows it. Ocasio-Cortez fired back instantly, her political survival instincts kicking in as she readied her rehearsed list. "Senator, with all due respect, I have successfully passed 3 amendments into law. I have personally helped secure crucial funeral assistance for COVID-stricken families. I have proudly co-sponsored landmark, generation-defining legislation, including the Inflation Reduction Act." Kennedy slowly raised one single finger, pausing the barrage. "Co-sponsored," he repeated softly, letting the word hang precariously in the chilled air of the chamber. "That is a mighty fine word. I co-sponsor things too, but co-sponsoring a bill, Congresswoman, is exactly like claiming you helped cook the family Thanksgiving dinner simply because you brought the paper napkins." He paused, just long enough for the imagery to settle in the minds of the audience. "Somebody else spent all day in the kitchen doing the cooking. You just showed up at the very end with some napkins and demanded to put your name at the top of the menu." The room did not just laugh politely this time. It broke. It was a real, involuntary eruption. The kind of deep, resonant laughter that starts in one specific row and rolls forward like a tidal wave until the entire gallery is engulfed in it. A seasoned reporter sitting in the second row literally bit down hard on her pen to stop a grin from spreading across her face. A stern-faced U.S. Marshal standing guard along the marble wall suddenly found the floor tiles incredibly fascinating, staring down intensely. A skeptical woman in the public gallery, who had been sitting with her arms tightly crossed in defiance since the hearing began, uncrossed them, without even realizing her body had betrayed her ideology. 200 people had just heard something far too accurate to logically argue with and way too fundamentally funny to hold inside. And here is the profound truth about that specific breed of laughter. It is never rooted in cruelty. It is rooted entirely in recognition. Every single person sitting in that room and every exhausted American watching at home on their screens had, at some point in their lives, watched a smooth-talking coworker gladly take all the credit for a grueling project they did not build. They intimately knew exactly what those napkins looked like, because they had spent their entire careers quietly cleaning up after the napkin people of the world. Kennedy smoothly pulled back, employing the classic tactic of the political possum who always retreats just when the trap snaps shut. "I do not mean to be ugly about this. I truly do not. Amendments absolutely matter. But you and I both know, deep down, that there is a massive, undeniable difference between writing a foundational law and simply signing your name on the bottom of somebody else's hard work. 7 years, Congresswoman. Your signature on the final line of 0 laws." His voice underwent a subtle shift then, growing warmer, adopting an almost nostalgic cadence that echoed a bygone era. "When I first came to Washington, a freshman congressman spent their entire first term keeping their head down, diligently learning how to draft complex legislation, memorizing the arcane rules of the committee, figuring out the grueling process of how a bill actually becomes a law. They did not spend their time learning how a 15-second clip becomes a headline or how to manufacture outrage to go viral. The job was the job. Somewhere along the line, that completely changed, and you are standing squarely on the very spot where the earth shifted." He looked directly at the television camera for the very first time, piercing the fourth wall. And when he spoke now, he was no longer addressing Ocasio-Cortez. He was speaking directly to the soul of the American people. Every struggling family in your district in the Bronx that desperately needed a law, not a snarky tweet, not an out-of-context clip, not a manufactured hearing moment that plays on a continuous loop for 48 hours and then vanishes into the digital ether. They needed a real law, the kind with a binding number on it that actively changes their skyrocketing rent, or legally caps their crippling electricity bill, or firmly puts a qualified teacher back into their child's failing public school. They patiently waited for 7 long years, and that law never came. But the self-righteous tweets kept coming, the viral clips kept coming, the glossy magazine interviews kept coming, and somewhere between all that blinding digital fire, somebody entirely forgot to build anything real. He tapped the single page lying on his desk once. "Keep that piece of paper, Congresswoman. Flip it over. The back is entirely blank. There is plenty of room back there for 7 more years of absolutely nothing." He paused, letting the devastating visual sink in. "But before we get to the future, let's take a hard look at what you actually did accomplish. Because it turns out that 0 is not even the worst number printed on this page. Let's talk deeply about the tangible jobs you actively killed. His voice altered again, the folksy charm evaporating to reveal a layer of pure, unadulterated coldness beneath it. In 2018, Amazon specifically picked Long Island City in Queens to be the home of their massive new headquarters right next door to your district. 25,000 high-paying jobs, $30 billion in brand new revenue for the state of New York. $4 billion in direct wages for engineers, software programmers, hard-hat construction workers, and every single mom-and-pop restaurant, corner bodega, and neighborhood dry cleaner that would have proudly served them. He looked down at the damning sheet. You personally led the militant charge against it. You loudly called it corporate greed. You stood before the cameras and said New York should not be in the business of funding freebie helipads for robber baron billionaires. And so, Amazon packed up and left. Kennedy let one heavy, suffocating beat pass before dropping his volume to a quiet, lethal register. And when those 25,000 generational jobs vanished into thin air, Congresswoman, you did not mourn them. You went straight onto Twitter and you actively celebrated. Your exact words. Today was the day everyday New Yorkers defeated Amazon's corporate greed. You looked at losing 25,000 livelihoods, and you had the audacity to call it a historic victory. He leaned forward, closing the physical distance. There was a blue-collar construction worker in Queens who told a local radio station with a breaking voice that he had just been officially hired to build that very campus. He had enthusiastically signed the union paperwork, proudly bought brand new tools, and then he watched you celebrate on Twitter while his lucrative contract was unceremoniously canceled the very next week. That man commutes 90 agonizing minutes each way to New Jersey now, every single day. 90 minutes there, 90 minutes back. 3 irreplaceable hours of his life, gone every day, simply because the prosperous jobs that were marching right into his neighborhood got violently turned away at the door by your rhetoric. He sat back slowly. 25,000 families exactly like his. And it was never just about the jobs themselves, it was about the entire ecosystem that naturally grows around 25,000 steady paychecks. The neighborhood daycare center that would have eagerly opened to serve those workers' children. The struggling bodega on the corner that would have thrived and stayed open instead of boarding up its windows. The immense tax revenue that would have been injected into crumbling transit systems, into affordable housing, into the very public schools that you continually claimed you were fighting for. All of it gone. Not because the complex business deal naturally fell apart, but because you purposefully blew it up with political dynamite and then aggressively took a victory lap on the smoldering ashes of their futures. Ocasio-Cortez leaned aggressively into her microphone, her posture rigid. She was historically good at navigating this specific battleground, and she knew she was good here because this precise populist argument had won her the district in the first place, and she had delivered it flawlessly 1,000 times before. Those were $3.5 billion in massive corporate subsidies. Senator, freely handed over to the richest, most monopolistic company on the face of the earth, all while the MTA in New York City was literally crumbling, while our public schools went chronically underfunded, and while desperate families in my own district could not even afford to keep the lights on in the winter. You want me to sit here and apologize for bravely standing between a trillion-dollar predatory corporation and the sacred public treasury? I absolutely will not. I will never apologize for doing exactly what my constituents sent me here to do. Give her this much credit, the argument landed. It almost always landed. A young, idealistic staffer sitting directly behind her nodded vigorously in agreement. The progressive political math always possessed a seductive simplicity to it that worked incredibly well in the manufactured theater of a hearing room. $3 billion for a billionaire. It intuitively sounded morally wrong, fundamentally unjust. It was specifically focus grouped and designed to sound wrong. But Kennedy did not stupidly chase her emotional argument down the rabbit hole. He calmly walked right around it. Governor Cuomo, your very own governor, a leading figure of your own political party, explicitly stated that the guaranteed return was $30 billion in revenue for just $3 billion in strategic incentives. That mathematically breaks down to $10 back for every single dollar invested in the community. Even I can confidently do that math, Congresswoman, and I went to an old-school institution where the classroom calculator still had a hand crank on the side. A short burst of laughter cut through the tension, but the brutal reality of the math hung heavily in the air long after the laughter died away. But the Amazon fiasco was really just the appetizer. Let's dig into the main course. Your signature Green New Deal. Kennedy purposefully did not rush this critical segment. He read meticulously from the page like a prosecuting attorney delivering closing arguments. The Heritage Foundation meticulously estimated the staggering cost of just the energy components alone: $3.9 trillion in decimated GDP, 1.4 million American jobs entirely wiped out, $40,000 in devastating lost income for the average family of four. Household electricity bills permanently skyrocketing by 12 to 14%, and your very own frequently asked questions document, proudly published on your very own official website, explicitly promised total economic security for people who are, and I quote directly from your text, unable or unwilling to work. Unwilling. Ocasio-Cortez leaned back into the microphone, her voice rising with defensive urgency. That particular document was never finalized, Senator. It was merely a rough working draft that an overzealous staffer accidentally released prematurely, and it absolutely does not reflect the final policy. Kennedy slowly raised 4 fingers into the air, extending them one at a time with agonizing deliberation. Ma'am, it was officially hosted on your congressional website, with your name emblazoned across the top. He ticked off the first finger. 1. Your trusted senior advisor went on national television on Fox News and aggressively claimed the document was maliciously doctored by conservatives. He ticked the second finger. 2. Then, under immense pressure, he quietly admitted it was actually real. He ticked the third. 3. Then your own chief of staff frantically pivoted and claimed it was just an early draft. He ticked the fourth. 4. Then, when all else failed, you callously threw a junior staffer under the proverbial bus and blamed them. 4 completely different, contradictory stories about one single piece of paper. Where I come from, we have a very specific phrase for that sequence of events. We call that getting caught, and then immediately getting caught, desperately trying to cover up the getting caught. The room laughed again, but there was absolutely no warmth in the sound this time. It was the grim, decisive kind of laughter that permanently ends careers. The kind of laugh a room emits when it has collectively decided that the emperor truly has no clothes. Kennedy reached methodically into his folder once more, extracting a second piece of paper, noticeably thinner than the first. Now, I want to read you something very important that was not written by me, nor was it written by any right-wing Republican. He read the text excruciatingly slowly, ensuring every syllable struck like a hammer. The AFL-CIO officially wrote you a formal letter, Congresswoman. The single largest, most powerful labor federation in the United States of America, your supposed progressive allies, your very own people. And here is exactly what they wrote. He found the highlighted line. The Green New Deal resolution is far too short on specific, actionable solutions that actually speak to the economic survival and the daily jobs of our union members. He looked up, his expression deadpan. That is not Tucker Carlson on Fox News, Congresswoman. That is the voice of organized American labor, looking you dead in the eye and telling you that your grand, signature legislative plan does not possess a viable plan for their jobs. Nobody in the room laughed at that one. That particular revelation traveled somewhere far deeper and darker than a mere laugh could ever reach, penetrating the icy depths of a political reality where your own trusted allies publicly turning against you is infinitely worse than your bitterest enemies attacking you. Because when a staunch Republican boldly declares your progressive plan is terrible, you can easily rally your base and fight it. But when your own bedrock labor unions publicly declare your plan will destroy their livelihoods, the fight is already completely over. You just simply haven't heard the final bell ring yet. Kennedy's voice dropped to a hushed, reverent quiet. Every hard-working American in this country who relies on natural gas to heat their home in the dead of winter, who drives a pickup truck to a grueling job, who sweats on a dusty factory floor, who wakes up before dawn to run a family farm. Your sweeping plan boldly declares that their entire way of life is the core problem, not just the cost of doing business. Their actual life, the fundamental way they exist. And you proudly wrote it down on a piece of paper and stamped your name on it for the world to see. And when the working class finally read it and revolted, you cowardly deleted the web page in the dead of night and blamed a nameless intern. He shook his head slowly, exuding a profound sense of disappointment. When your very own labor unions look at the math and say your master plan doesn't have any actual jobs in it, Congresswoman, it is no longer a plan. It is nothing more than a childish wish list. She had systematically killed 25,000 real jobs and unapologetically called it a massive victory. Her own bedrock labor union stated unequivocally that her visionary plan was devoid of employment. If that staggering level of political hubris made you shake your head in disbelief, you must brace yourself, because the deeply revealing segment about the luxurious dress and the exclusive $35,000 elite party is coming up next. Ocasio-Cortez was visibly done being cornered by relentless questioning. After surviving 2 grueling rounds of empirical evidence, the finely tuned political machine that had successfully carried her through nearly a decade of fawning camera lenses and viral moments was now running dangerously hot. She did not attempt to pivot logically. She did not desperately reach for nuanced policy details. Instead, she retreated to somewhere far deeper and more primal than policy. She retreated to the only sanctuary she had always known whenever the political ground violently shifted beneath her feet. It was a well-worn tactic that had flawlessly worked every single time before. "You really want to talk about my record, Senator?" Her voice dramatically dropped in pitch, becoming noticeably slower, substantially quieter, projecting an aura of raw, unfiltered authenticity. "Let me tell you the absolute truth about my real record. My beloved father tragically died of aggressive cancer when I was just a struggling college student. My grieving family almost lost the very home we lived in. I spent years exhaustingly waiting tables and frantically bartending late into the night just to barely pay off crushing student loans, all while the broken, rigged system that you and your colleagues spent 40 years carefully building made it incrementally harder for desperate families exactly like mine to merely survive another month. I boldly ran for the United States Congress because absolutely nobody in this gilded building was, authentically speaking, for the marginalized people I grew up with. And against all conceivable odds, I won a stunning victory against a powerful 10-term incumbent in a neglected district that absolutely nobody in the Washington establishment ever thought would dare to vote for someone who looks like me." She was not finished, the fiery momentum building in her chest. "So, no, Senator, I absolutely will not sit quietly in this chair and allow myself to be callously reduced to a single page of cold, unfeeling numbers by a privileged man who has spent 4 long decades deeply entrenched in the very systemic machinery that directly produced the brutal poverty I grew up in. I am far more than a simple bill count. I am the proud daughter of a hard-working man who literally cleaned commercial buildings just so his kid could one day sit in one of these very chairs. And I will never, ever apologize for the immense size and unyielding power of my voice. Give her this undeniable truth because it was breathtakingly real. The heartbreaking story was entirely true. The visceral pain echoing in her voice was entirely true. And for 20 agonizingly long seconds, every soul in that cavernous room genuinely heard it, and they deeply felt it in their bones. In that fleeting, vulnerable window, everything Senator Kennedy had meticulously deconstructed over the past hour hung precariously by the thinnest of threads. A cynical reporter slowly set her pen down on her notepad. A seasoned Democratic staffer's eyes suddenly went bright with unshed tears. A conservative woman sitting in the 3rd row, who had been vigorously nodding along with Kennedy's devastating points all morning, abruptly stopped nodding. The raw emotional momentum had violently shifted. It was now entirely hers, completely hers. And it held. It held. And that ancient, deeply ingrained human instinct began to move through the room like an invisible electrical current, the overwhelming instinct to step back out of respect, the powerful instinct to let the tragic, beautiful story serve as the ultimate, unassailable answer. It is the exact same protective instinct that has successfully shielded every charismatic politician in history who has brilliantly weaponized their own personal biography into an impenetrable suit of armor. It is a profoundly powerful instinct. It has miraculously won countless elections. It has prematurely ended brutal congressional hearings. And in this very room, for exactly 20 suspended seconds, it worked flawlessly. It held power for about 20 seconds. Kennedy simply waited. He did not physically flinch. He did not emotionally soften his features. He flatly refused to do what the overwhelming human instinct in the room was begging him to do, which was to gracefully back off, utter something appropriately gracious about her struggle, and gently change the uncomfortable subject. He deliberately let the tragic story travel the entirety of the room and fully spend its emotional energy, the precise way you patiently watch a massive ocean wave finally crash and spread itself thin upon the sandy shore. And when the heavy silence in the room became full enough, dense enough to cut with a knife, he spoke. He spoke gently, almost tenderly, adopting the deeply sorrowful tone you reserve for someone right before you are forced to tell them a brutal truth that you can never take back. Congresswoman, that is an undeniably beautiful, deeply moving story, and I sincerely mean that. I truly, honestly do. You came from absolutely nothing. You fought against unimaginable odds, and you miraculously built something extraordinary. I would gladly shake your hand for that monumental achievement in any parking lot in America. Nobody in this entire room is trying to take that incredible personal triumph away from you. Not one single person. He paused, and the room deeply felt the immense weight of that pregnant pause, and the room suddenly knew with a terrifying certainty exactly what was barreling down the tracks toward her. But you did not come to the United States Congress simply to be a touching story. You came here to write the laws of the land. And in 7 long years, the beautiful story just got bigger and bigger and bigger. His voice instantly dropped its warmth, snapping flat and utterly devoid of mercy, and the actual laws stayed at 0. The emotional thread violently snapped. The psychological atmosphere of the room shifted back, not with blinding speed, but with a terrifying, unavoidable certainty, simply because Kennedy had just vocalized the exact uncomfortable truth that every single person in the room had secretly been thinking, but had felt incredibly guilty for daring to think. The story is undeniably beautiful, but what on earth did she actually accomplish? That specific maneuver is the most devastating, lethal kind of intellectual redirect that exists in modern politics. It is not the vulgar kind of redirect that viciously attacks a person's character. It is the far more dangerous kind that forces absolutely everyone in the room to turn inward and desperately ask themselves, have I foolishly been buying a beautiful, emotionally manipulative story for years instead of rightfully demanding tangible results? The profound, crushing guilt of that internal realization is what physically moved the room, not Kennedy himself. He just planted the seed. She had brilliantly deployed the single most powerful, emotionally bulletproof personal story she possessed in her arsenal, and Kennedy did not deny a single syllable of it. He merely asked the one fundamental question that the beautiful story could never, ever answer. Where are the actual laws? If you have ever found yourself deeply moved to tears by a slick politician's tragic backstory, only to later wonder what they actually accomplished for your neighborhood, you need to hear exactly how this ended. Last thing, Congresswoman. I truly mean that. This is the very last thing. Kennedy's voice was significantly lower now, dropping into a register of grim finality. This was the final tab in the metaphorical folder. The singular piece of evidence that perfectly encapsulates the entire agonizing hour and places a heavy, gilded frame around it. September 2021, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The exclusive, world-famous Met Gala. A staggering $35,000 for a single entry ticket. And you famously arrived wearing a lavish designer dress that boldly screamed, "Tax the rich" in bright red lettering. He did not rush the delivery. He let the sheer absurdity of the visual paint itself. The House Ethics Committee, July 2025. A comprehensive 31-page investigative report. They unequivocally found that you blatantly violated the congressional gift rule. You purposefully paid well under fair market value for the luxury dress, for the designer shoes, for the high-end accessories. Your political staff absurdly tried to compare the astronomical price of a custom, handmade couture gown to a cheap, weekend rent-the-runway rental. The Bipartisan Ethics Committee officially called that laughable comparison unrealistic. You completely failed to pay the full required amount until long after the formal federal investigation had already begun, and the committee ultimately ordered you to pay an additional $2,733 in arrears. He looked up, his eyes boring into hers. The viral dress that loudly demanded we tax the rich was ironically a dress that you yourself refused to fully pay for. He slowly turned the page on his desk. Now, I also took the liberty of looking up the economic realities of your district, Congresswoman. The median household income in your section of the Bronx sits right at about $30,000 a year. $30,000. He let that devastating number land with the weight of an anvil. The single ticket to the elite celebrity party where you proudly modeled that dress literally cost more than your average working-class voter earns in 12 grueling months of manual labor. He let one agonizing breath pass through the microphone. And here is the deeply unsettling part that absolutely nobody in the media likes to talk about, but that every single American clearly saw in the glossy photographs. Every single billionaire and Hollywood celebrity at that exclusive gala walked around freely without a mask, including you. And every single working-class servant, every exhausted waiter holding a tray, every busboy, every person working the floor on their swollen feet all night long was forced to wear one. He looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. The invisible people serving you were muzzled in masks. The elite people being served were not. And yet the dress hypocritically screamed, "Tax the rich." He settled back into his chair, painting the final, inescapable portrait. Tax the rich, plastered on a lavish dress that the rich essentially paid for, at an exclusive party that your own voters could not even afford to park their cars outside of, cheerfully served by working-class people forced into masks, while you smiled brilliantly for the flashing cameras without one. The massive hearing room descended into a suffocating, irreversible silence, the absolute worst kind of quiet known in politics, infinitely more devastating than mocking laughter, because it is the cold, undeniable sound of a room collectively deciding that a formidable political threat has become entirely irrelevant. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez desperately attempted to fill the void with a rehearsed, robotic defense about overseeing cultural institutions at the elite Met Gala, but the hollow words shattered on impact, leaving Senator John Kennedy to deliver the final psychological blow with devastating precision. "You masterfully changed the national conversation," Kennedy acknowledged with a slow nod, the hum of the overhead lights suddenly deafening in the stillness. "You changed it from, 'What impactful law did you pass?' to 'Did the designer dress make the front page of the news?'" He let the brutal reality hang in the air before dropping the ultimate hammer. "You intentionally changed it away from the only conversation that matters to the desperate people who sent you here, which is simply this. Did their life get any better?" Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. As 40 million Americans watching live witnessed a seasoned United States senator methodically dismantle a viral icon, exposing that after 7 years of blinding rhetorical fire, her tangible legislative record remained an absolute zero. Cornered and entirely stripped of her rehearsed armor, Ocasio-Cortez stared down at the damning GovTrack page in her hands, her eyes reflecting the hollow defeat of a painful truth she had spent years refusing to see. With trembling hands, she slowly folded her own legislative record in half, folded it again, and silently buried it deep inside a dark leather folder on live national television, a profound, wordless surrender. As the chairman broke the spell and the hearing collapsed into history, the real-world shockwaves had already begun tearing through the working-class heart of the country. A weary Queens construction worker, who lived the bitter reality of the 25,000 Amazon jobs Ocasio-Cortez had killed, merely stared at his scarred hands, quietly validated that someone in Washington had finally exposed the celebrated progressive victory that forced his grueling 90-minute commute, while hundreds of miles away in Ohio, a lifelong Democratic retired teacher set down her iPad in profound exhaustion, whispering to her oblivious husband, "I always used to think she was the future, but the future is supposed to actually build something." Yet, the true psychological brutality of this political deconstruction was only just beginning, because as the grand marble room emptied out and the glaring television lights clicked off one by one, a lone, shadowy investigative operative remained completely still in the gallery, his eyes locked not on the departing Congresswoman, but on the very desk Kennedy had just vacated. Left behind in the frantic shuffle of the adjourning committee was a thick, unmarked manila envelope, and as a tired maintenance staffer reached out to casually sweep it into the recycling bin, the unsealed clasp gave way, spilling a single, high-resolution photograph onto the polished mahogany, a photo so explosively volatile, so fiercely contradictory to the entire carefully curated progressive narrative of the last decade, that the staffer instantly froze in sheer panic as he recognized the faces staring back at him. What exactly was captured inside that damning photograph, and how will it threaten to permanently dismantle an entire political machine overnight? Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because that explosive revelation is a story for tomorrow.